Hey, what is going on, guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video we're going to be breaking down the new strong and weak champions for patch 9.24. And as this video goes live as well, guys, I am going to be streaming over on Twitch, continuing my Unranked to Diamond series. A lot of you guys actually decided to check out this stream when I shouted out in my last video, so I do appreciate that, and thank you to everybody that decided to check out this stream. So I thought I'd shout it out again in this video for those of you who didn't see the last video, or for those of you who don't know I stream. Now, one thing I forgot to mention last time is that if you're on NA and your true elo is the elo that I'm at right now, I think I'm in placements, I'm like bronze 1 right now. So if you're around that elo and you want to duo, then just add my account. It's RvzStealth, but it's with an I instead of an L. So just type in an I where you would type in the L and you can add my Smurf account. So to start things off here, we're going to be taking a look at the weaker champions for this patch. There's more impactful changes to the champions getting weaker, so I want to take a look at those ones first. So first up here for Kassadin, he is getting a Q nerf and a W nerf, cooldown being increased on his Q at the earlier ranks there, so it's going to decrease his poke potential a little bit in the laning phase. W mana restoration is also being decreased there from 4 to 8% down to 4 to 6%, so two pretty decent nerfs to Kassadin. I still think he's going to remain one of these stronger mid laners though for next patch. It's not going to be enough to really drop him down too much, so he will still remain either a low S tier or a high A tier pick for 9.24. Next up for Akali, Q hitbox behind Akali is being removed, and I think what this means is that in previous patches or in this patch right now, if you use your Q and there's like a minion behind you or a champion behind you a little bit, your Q will still deal damage to them, so that's being removed for next patch. Rank 5 bonus damage to minions is being decreased from 133% down to 125%, and I'm not too sure if this will be impactful or not. It will only be impactful if it affects Akali's breakpoint to where she's able to one-shot the back wave with her Q. If it does affect that, then this would be a pretty big nerf. If it doesn't, then it's really not going to affect her at all, so I do still think Akali will remain an A tier pick in 9.24. So next up for Garen, they are nerfing his E damage for next patch. Spins per attack speed on his E is being lowered from 1 per 20% down to 1 per 25%. The damage per level on his E is also being decreased from 8.2 down to 6.6, so a pretty decent hit to Garen. Right now in 9.23, he's like one of the best top laners in the game, so even with these nerfs, I still expect him to be a pretty good top lane pick. I don't think they're going to be the death of Garen by any means, so I do still expect him to be an S tier or an A tier pick for 9.24. Now for Senna, she is getting hit with a bunch of different changes. Base stats are being changed, health growth is being lowered from 85 down to 75, so you're losing around like a little bit more than 150 HP there at level 18, which is a decent chunk. Passive, the soul drop chance on minions that Senna kills is being lowered from 5.55% all the way down to 1.67%, so this is obviously here more of a nerf to the AD carry Senna than the support Senna. Q damage is being lowered there, the base is being lowered, and the scaling is being lowered on it, so also another more so of a hit to AD carry Senna than support Senna, but it is still going to hurt support Senna a little bit as well. The W root duration there, it is being decreased at the earlier ranks, and then the AP ratio on the ultimate is actually being increased. So with these changes, I do expect Senna to drop out of S tier down into A tier for the AD carry role. I do think that support Senna could still be holding on to S tier though for next patch. Senna is just performing extremely well right now for both AD carry and for support, so even with these changes here, she quite possibly could still remain S tier just because of how strong she is right now in 9.23, but I do expect her for AD carry to drop down into A tier. So next up here for Ryze, he's getting a pretty big hit to his Q damage for next patch. The base on it is being decreased by 15 at all ranks, so that's really going to hurt his trading potential in the laning phase. It is going to hurt his DPS in mid to late game fights a little bit, but it's more so going to hurt his early game than his mid to late game. I do think that with this change here, for the higher elos, he's still going to remain an A tier pick, but I think that for the majority of elos, for the lower elos, I do think he is going to drop down into B tier. And then another indirect nerf to Ryze, which could drop him down even more for next patch, is a nerf to Conquer for ranged champions. So ranged champions healing from Conquer is being decreased from 15% down to 8% of damage dealt, so it's kind of just getting cut in half there. Ranged champion buff duration is also being lowered from 8 seconds down to 6 seconds, and I think that with this change here, this could just mean the end of Conquer for ranged champions. Right now on a champion like Ryze, Conquer isn't performing that much better than Phase Rush. Phase Rush is still a really really good option on a champion like Ryze or Cassiopeia. So with this nerf here, I feel like a lot of champions are probably just going to go back to the rune they were using before Conquer. And for a champion like Ezreal right now, who's not getting changed at all in this patch, this is going to be a super big hit to him because he's already performing weaker with the removal of Kleptomancy, and now with Conquer being the only rune he can actually use in this patch right now getting nerfed, it's just going to make Ezreal an even weaker pick for 924. Alright, so moving on to the champions getting buffed now. First up, we got Sivir. So base stat here, pretty small buff. Base AD being increased from 61 up to 63. So 2 extra base AD on Sivir. Is this really going to do anything? I don't think so. She should still remain a B tier pick right now. In the preseason, she isn't performing very well. She is performing below average compared to most AD carries right now. So I just don't think this buff is going to be enough to really do anything for her in 924. So next up here for Karma in 923, she is underperforming quite a lot. She ended up getting some nerfs a couple patches back that did end up hurting her, so it looks like Riot is giving her something back into her kit here for 924. Pretty substantial buff here. Her E shield strength is being increased from 70 to 170 up to 80, scaling to 200, so 30 shielding increase there once you get that maxed out. Once you do hit your mid game on Karma and get that maxed out, you are going to notice the shielding increase there on her E. 30 extra shielding on a pretty short cooldown once you do get 40% CDR is going to be nice for Karma for 924, and this should bump her back up into A tier and into a pretty good spot for next patch. So next up for Amumu, he's probably going to take the award for this patch for the most laughable change, and it's going to be a Q cooldown decrease being lowered from 12 to 8 seconds, now going to be 10 to 8 seconds, so a 2-second decrease there at rank 1 in his Q. This change doesn't really matter too much at all. The only time where it would really come into effect is when you'd be looking to like skirmish in the early game with Amumu, but a lot of the time you're not even going to be wanting to skirmish in the early game with Amumu. You don't want to get into a lot of like 2v2s or 3v3s with him, and when you're ganking with him in the early game, you're only going to use your Q once. Like, it's not like you're going to be using your Q twice when you're ganking with Amumu, so this change really doesn't matter too much. If it were a buff to his W's cooldown or to his E's cooldown, it would be a lot more impactful, but the Q buff here, it's not going to change his place on the tier list for next patch. So next up for Yuumi, she's getting the most amount of changes in 9.24, so I've kind of split these up into 4 different pages here. We're first going to go over her passive, then her Q, then her W, and then lastly her E. So for her passive, it's now going to restore 50 to 160 mana based on level. Shield strength is also being increased from 50 to 300 up to 50 to 400. Now for her Q, the mana cost on it is being increased, but keep in mind that you do have that passive buff there giving you mana back, so even though it's being increased here a little bit, it's probably not going to matter too much. AP ratio on her Q though is being decreased by 15%. Empowered damage is being changed from 50 to 225 to 50 to 275. Now the AP ratio is being decreased there on it though, so I think that if you are going for AP Yuumi later on in the game, your Q is going to end up doing a lot less damage for next patch. The missile duration is being decreased from 3 seconds down to 2 seconds. Now for her W, it's getting a lot of different changes here to where it's now going to have a 0.25 second channel time when attaching from an unattached state. It's no longer going to follow teleport either, so the Sivir Yuumi lane, which was really popular at one point, or the Garen Yuumi lane down in the bot lane, that's going to be a lot weaker for 924. Immobilizing effects are now going to put the ability on a 5-second cooldown as well, so that is actually a pretty big hit there to the W. Now the big buff here though on the W is to the adaptive force that you're going to be getting from it, so it's going to be buffed from 5 to 13 and 4 to 16% AP up to 12 to 20 base and then 12 to 20% AP, so a really big buff there to the adaptive force that you're now going to be getting from your W. And then lastly here for her E, the cooldown is going to be decreased there from 18 to 14 down to 12 to 8. The mana cost is going to be increased though. Keep in mind though, her passive buff there is going to be giving her mana back. Healing is going to be increased from 30 to 70 up to 70 to 230, and the AP ratio is being increased from from 0.1 up to 0.3. Then the movement speed on it is going to be decreased from 25% down to 15%. It's no longer going to have charges though, so that's why they are going to be buffing just the flat healing on it and the AP ratio on the healing, because it's no longer going to have charges. Movement speed is also no longer going to decay. You're no longer going to have increased healing based on missing HP either, and it's actually now going to grant you 25 to 45% attack speed. So it looks like here with these changes to her E and to her W, she is going to be a lot more focused on like buffing up her AD carry and not so much focused on her damage herself and dealing poke damage with her Q. So next up here for Rammus, he is getting a couple buffs. He's not performing super well in preseason, similar to Amumu, with the priority on dragons increasing, with the ability to skirmish being more important here in the preseason. These two junglers just aren't performing as good as the majority, so Amumu and Rammus both getting buffed. I do think they have to be careful with the Rammus buffs, because with the new mountain dragon, that can be so devastating on the champion. If you can get a few of them, you're just so tanky and you're pretty much impossible to kill in the mid to late game. Base stats there in Rammus being increased. You're going to be getting an extra 150 HP at level 18, and the E cooldown is also being decreased by a little bit, so 2 seconds lower there once you get it maxed out. So next up here for Braum, he is getting a bunch of really nice changes. Braum has been in a pretty bad spot here for the past couple months, so they're finally deciding to give him some buffs, and I do think they have to be careful with Braum as well here, because usually when Braum's a decent pick for solo queue, he's like a pick or ban champion in pro play, and I do think that with these buffs, he is going to bump up into either B or A tier for 924. Base stats are being increased there, like Rammus, he's getting an extra 150 HP at level 18. W cooldown is being decreased. The mana cost on that is also being decreased, but the big change here is to the scaling that his W gives his teammate and himself. Now, to try to make this as least confusing as possible, the way Braum's W works is that the more armor and magic resist you get, the more armor and magic resist you're going to be getting for using your W, so it scales off of your bonus armor and MR. So what is getting changed for next patch, or how it's getting changed, is that the scaling on it is being changed there from 10 to 16% of your bonus armor and magic resist to 12%, and that's when you use it on an ally. So in the earlier stages of the game, you are going to be allowing your ally to be a little bit tankier. The bigger buff though here is to the amount of armor and magic resist you're going to be granting yourself. So instead of scaling from 10 to 16% of your bonus armor and magic resist, it's going to scale just from 36% of your bonus armor and MR. So when you use your W as Braum in next patch and you do have a bunch of items there in the mid game, you are going to be a lot tankier and a lot more difficult to kill. Now for Braum's ultimate, it's getting two different buffs. Base damage is being increased at the later ranks in it, but the knock-up duration, it is being increased by quite a lot on the first target hit. So that first target you're trying to lock down with Braum, based on the distance traveled of your ultimate, it is going to be knocking up the opponent for a longer duration. So instead of just knocking them up for 0.25 seconds, it's now going to knock them up for 1 to 1.5 seconds based on the distance from Braum. Now for the new Keystone Omni Stone, it is getting buffed for next patch to where it's now going to choose the keystone that you get a little bit smarter based on which would be the best for the situation. So for example, if you're like lower on HP, then it would be more likely to give you Fleet Footwork for the healing. If the enemy is lower on HP and you're right beside them or something, it would be more likely for you to get Dark Harvest. If you're nowhere near any champions, you'd be more likely to get Predator. So it's just going to choose keystones for you a little bit better for next patch. And then lastly, to round it out here, Rift Herald is getting changed. The charge base damage is being increased from 1500 up to 2000. Charge damage per level is being decreased from 175 down to 125. So basically what they're trying to do here with this change is they're trying to make it so that Rift Herald is a little bit more enticing to take in the early game. I really don't think it's going to change how junglers prioritize objectives for next patch though. Dragons are still going to have higher priority over Rift Herald. I think the only thing that it could really influence is that if you're playing a very strong early game top laner and you're able to snowball in the early game, if you can look to solo out that Rift Herald and you can look to take that, or if you're playing jungle and you've already secured a dragon and you can look to secure Rift Herald, it is going to increase your snowball potential a little bit there in the early game, but I think that overall it's not going to really shift the meta too much for next patch. So that is going to be all for the video, guys. That's what we're looking at heading into patch 9.24. If you guys did enjoy this video, then be sure to drop a like and subscribe subscribe if you have yet to already. So thanks for watching, guys. Have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.